GSMC Baseball Podcast. We're talking about segment 3 here, which is relievers becoming starters, and just overall having a conversation about that. And will that become a new trend in baseball, and how will it go? So, just to start off with this, we've seen it over the past few years. Just teams taking their younger relievers who have been locked down, are really good in that role, seeing something in them and transforming them into successful starters. I think we've seen it going back the past few years, something as big as Chris Sale, who was a reliever to start his career with the White Sox, kind of was projected that way. But then the White Sox made him a starter, and obviously I'd say it went pretty well, considering he's had a really, really good career and won a Cy Young in his career. Not necessarily with the White Sox, but with the Red Sox, and I'd say it's very successful, is what I'm trying to say. It's very successful. Obviously, I'd say it's one of the bigger success stories with this. We've seen other failed attempts, but I think when you look at a guy like Chris Sale, you look at how well it can go when it does happen. So first, we're going to start off with Michael King. Michael King was on the Yankees last year, obviously. He was a really good reliever for the Yankees. But they wanted more out of him, and in the middle of the season and kind of towards the end, they started transitioning him to be a starter. And it was kind of when they were out of it. They had all the injuries dealing with last year, more specifically Aaron Judge and what happened there. So they kind of made him a starter to see what would happen, and he was really, really good. He was one of the better starters in baseball, in fact, at that time. And you look at him; he always had a really good fastball. He had a good slider. I think he just has good stuff and good pitches to be a starter. And what did him becoming a starter do for the Yankees? Well, it got them Juan Soto. You look at going back to the Soto trades with the Yankees, trade talks, the Padres, from reports, always really wanted Michael King. He was kind of the centerpiece of the trade that they always wanted. He was one of the reasons the Padres focused in on the Yankees when they were shopping Soto. Sorry. And now there were some elbow issues with him in the medical, as some reports stated, but they still wanted him. That's how much. So the Yankees turning their reliever into a starter in Michael King made them get arguably one of the better players in baseball in Juan Soto. So I think that's another example of just an extreme success story with these things, how well it can go and how well it can put your team up. Let's say they don't trade him. Let's say they get him back as a starter with the Yankees. He's probably sliding in as the number 3 guy in that rotation. You have Garrett Cole, you have Carlos Rodon, who they're hoping to be a bounce back. I mean, they signed him to a 7-year deal last year, so they obviously believe in him. I don't think 1 year of just injury-riddled starts and kind of not great stuff happening is going to take down their belief of him. But, they probably don't sign Stroman. Maybe they still trade for Soto without King. We don't know. But I think it just shows how well it can be done if it does happen when you turn a reliever into a starter. Now, I think you have to find the right reliever. With a guy like Michael King, you kind of always saw flashes of him. Okay, he can be something better than this. He kind of came up in the minors as a starter, but transitioned to a reliever more. And this brings me into the next person, which I'm going to talk about, is Reynaldo Lopez. Reynaldo Lopez was a reliever with the White Sox and also Angels and Guardians last year. A pretty good reliever for the past few years. Really just kind of solid, middle of the road guy, probably 6th, 7th, or 8th inning, depending on what day it was. But kind of out of nowhere, the Braves signed him to a 3-year deal. We were like, okay, just solidifying the back end of the bullpen for the Braves. But no, we came out from Ken Rosenthal and a few other people that they were going to stretch him out and make him a starter, which is really, really interesting. Now, he was a top starter prospect with the Nationals, but got traded to the White Sox in a big trade for Adam Eaton with Lucas Giolito, like a few years ago. I'd say more than a few years, but years ago, I'd say. So with that, I mean, you look at the Braves here. The Braves obviously need starting pitching. It's the reason they didn't go to the World Series last year, even after having won a historic regular season. Now, they obviously see something in Reynaldo. Now, I'm not going to be doubting the Braves because, as you can see from the past few years, they are one of the better organizations in baseball, and they know what they're doing. So if they see something in Lopez, it would make sense for them to make him a starter. They think they can get a deal with him with the starting pitcher market. I think that also has something to do with this, the starting pitcher market, just how expensive the prices are. Look at a guy like Blake Snell, who's been up and down his whole career. Teams may not want to give him a big contract. So why not just try this out with Lopez? And if not, you'll just sign another guy in the next few years. So I think it's interesting. I'm not sure how Lopez is going to turn out. I don't necessarily know if he has the stuff to become a starting pitcher, but at the same time, the Braves know what they're doing. And I've learned not to doubt the Braves organization the past few years when it comes to player personnel decisions and just doing stuff like this, kind of out of the box things that help their organization a little bit. Next, we have a really, really interesting one that I really wanted to talk about, and that is Jordan Hicks. Now, Jordan Hicks is a really interesting case. So obviously came up with the Cardinals as a top prospect in that organization, kind of came up as a starting pitcher. He was always a flamethrower. He still is a flamethrower. He can throw 102 around pretty consistently. And turning that into a starter, that's kind of scary if they really think he can do really well. So obviously the Giants know what they're doing. I'm going to say that again. I think Giants I said this with the Braves, but the Giants as well. They're a really smart organization. They know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They know how to get stuff done. And I don't know how I feel about transitioning Hicks to a starter. Now, I doubt that he could go more than 5 innings consistently as a starter because he's going to be throwing. I would say his days of throwing 102 as a starter are probably over because I think frankly you're going to blow out your arm if you throw 102 consistently as a starter. As a reliever, obviously pitching 1 inning, it's very, very different. So I think you have to take that into account. But yeah, I mean, the Giants don't like giving out long-term starting pitcher contracts. We mentioned that before. So they saw something in Hicks. They're like, okay, if we can turn this fastball and a few other pitches into kind of a starter's repertoire, it can make him a really good pitcher. Now, I think this is kind of a question move again because just because he's throwing 100 miles per hour, you're turning a guy who throws 100 miles per hour into a starter. I think it's a really interesting thing. It's kind of questionable by the Giants, but again, they know what they're doing. Farhan Zaidi's a smart guy. Now, I think it's going to take a little time for Hicks to develop, kind of stretch out in spring training, be a starter. Now, the interesting thing is I don't think every team viewed Hicks as a starter. I think it was really only the Giants and maybe a few other teams. We heard of teams interested in him, like the Blue Jays, the Astros, the Rangers, the Yankees. Now, I don't think any of those teams had him pegged as a starter, but obviously the Giants did. So they obviously see something in him. They think if we can harness this guy who has such elite stuff, just pure elite stuff, maybe some of the better stuff in the game today, we can make him a lockdown starter. And we can, kind of get a bargain here. Like I said before, the starting pitching market is just so inflated nowadays because starting pitching is so important. You look at guys, so much more injuries in baseball, especially last year with the pitch clock. I think that had a lot to do with it. Just throwing just more and more till your arm kind of gives out because of the less time you have. So they want, teams want more cheaper contract starters, which I think is one of the main reasons the Braves did what they did with Reynaldo Lopez and what the Giants did with Jordan Hicks. So, yeah, I mean, looking at it kind of from a different end of the spectrum here, you have Mason Miller. Mason Miller is a top starting pitcher prospect for the A's, kind of like Jordan Hicks, threw really hard. But he had some injuries last year, and because of that, they're making him a closer for this year. Now, the A's obviously aren't going to do anything this year. They're really, really bad. I think we know this. I don't think they're going to have 1,000 fans at their games because of the whole situation with their fan base and them leaving their market. So I think obviously their fans are not very happy about that. But I think this is something interesting as well. Taking a guy who was a starting pitcher prospect, either didn't work out or in this case had injuries, and making him a closer for this year, just to see how his stuff can play and how he can pitch. I think the A's are going to turn him back into a starting pitcher next year. So maybe they just want to get him innings. I don't think they're going to be closing. He's going to be closing much games out for the A's because, as I said before, and as any baseball fan knows, the A's are not very good. So I don't think there's going to be many games to close out and kind of save in a way. So it makes sense. But I think it's interesting to look at it here with another side of the spectrum, another side of this conversation with the fact that, okay, it's not just relievers turning into starters, it's starters turning into relievers. Even if it's for a short time, you maybe want to preserve their arm if they're younger. You see something in them that, okay, maybe they're not necessarily a starter, but they can be more of a closer type, more kind of like that. Now, taking it to another person like Adbert Alzolay with the Cubs, he was a starting pitcher prospect, a guy I was really high on. I loved his raw stuff. I loved what he did as a pitcher, but they made him a closer, and he's now one of the better closers in the league with the Cubs. He was just really, really locked down last year, and I don't, I think relievers turning into starters will become a new trend in baseball. I think you have to pick the right pitchers for it. Not every reliever who's young and used to be a starter is built for it. But I think a lot of people are, and I think you're going to see teams start to do this a little more, kind of stretch out relievers, kind of quietly make them into more starter type roles, kind of get them into hybrid reliever roles. And I think you could also do it the other way, taking a starter to a closer because you want to make him a closer, but then also taking him back from a closer to a starting pitcher. Now, I want to make it very clear that starters turning into closers and relievers has been a thing for as long as baseball's been around. This is not a new thing. But I think it's really interesting to see if teams take younger guys who they want to limit innings on and make them closers at first, to limit injuries, then when they get going, slowly turn them into starters, kind of like the A's are doing with Mason Miller, and kind of doing something similar with that. Maybe it's not exactly what I'm talking about that they're doing, but it's still something that it's really interesting to me, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future with it. Next year,